in Korea. I've had 2 tours in Korea. Let me be very candid. Given the current security situation in Northeast Asia, the North Koreans would be irrational to agree to give up their nuclear weapons. We call them an irrational, erratic regime, but this is coldly calculating. They've seen what's happened to Iraq, what's happened to Libya, to a lesser extent what happened to the Ukraine after they've given up weapons or didn't achieve weapons. So Jim's right. This may be an ultimate goal as the byproduct of a new security structure, but as a going-in position, it's a non-starter.
Russian investigators putting the squeeze on Steve Bannon, who was hit with subpoenas from both the House Intel Committee and the special counsel, Robert Mueller. Let's discuss now CNN national security analyst, General Michael Hayden, and former director of the CIA and the NSA. Also with us is James Clapper, the former director of the National Intelligence. Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it. General Hayden, I'm going to start with you. Steve Bannon, the president's former chief strategist, called to testify before the grand jury as part of the investigation into possible Trump links between Trump's campaign or his associates and Russia. What does Mueller using a subpoena tell you about the investigation?
Well, number one, all along, I thought Director Mueller was going to be absolutely exhaustive in his investigation. Yes. And so now you've got the book out there, you've got the Bannon quotes in the book. I mean, he's got to go pull that rock up and look under that rock. So that's one thing. So I think Bob is just being thorough. Secondly, though, you know, the more rocks he pulls up, the more things we learn. And so I think there's besides just being complete here, I think there's a genuine curiosity on the part of the special counsel to see exactly what it is that Bannon knows and why it is he said the things that he said.
In that book?
Yeah.
In that book. All right. Director Clapper, to you now. Steve Bannon certainly faced questions about his reported comments in this book, Fire and Fury. The 3 senior guys in the campaign thought it was a good idea to meet with a foreign government inside Trump Tower in the conference room on the 25th floor with no lawyers. That's a quote from the book. Director Clapper, what's your take on how close to the president that this Russia investigation is getting?
Well, it's getting pretty close. And just to key off something that Mike just spoke about, the approach that Bob Mueller, Director Mueller, is taking as special counsel in this, and the thoroughness and the methodical way he's approaching this. And now, of course, you know, if you think of it as a series of concentric circles, ever closer to the president. So, you know, who's closer to, has been closer up until recently to the president than Steve Bannon. One of the things that I thought was interesting from the previous discussions was the concept of executive privilege. I'm not sure how that applies, particularly during the transition phase before the presidency's actually started. And I also am not really aware of executive privilege as a legal concept. So I don't quite understand how the White House and other than just to issue a blanket muzzle on Bannon with his remarkable appearance at the House Intelligence Committee today. If he couldn't talk about anything, I wonder why it went so long.
Yeah. Well, you have that, them not talking about it, and then the president, you know, has been downplaying a lot of it. He continues to push the narrative, General Hayden, that the Russian involvement in our electoral system is manufactured. I mean, he just tweeted this. He said just today, as a matter of fact, he said the Russian collusion hoax is dead, except as it pertains to the Dems. Public gets it. Are you concerned the president is not taking seriously the involvement that Russia had in the U.S. electoral system, and especially when it comes to the midterms, what could possibly happen?
Yeah. Oh my God, yes. All right. Now put the whole question of guilt, which we may or may not see,
right.
Responsibility, which we probably will see as this evolves. Put all that aside. That's history. Let's talk about present and future.
Right.
Look, I've said all along, what the president needs to say is, you did it. We know you did it. I know you did it. We're going to punish you for your doing it, and you're never going to be able to do it again. Look, this Russian effort, sophisticated in its own way, audacious in its own way, hit a seam. Public, private, policy, politics, federal, local, intelligence, law enforcement. A bit like, I don't want to over-dramatize this, a bit like the 9/11 attacks in that way, kind of an unexpected threat against an unknown weakness. And the only way you respond to that is through extraordinary effort and extraordinary structures. And Don, I'm telling you, and I think Jim would confirm this, our government doesn't go extraordinary without the direct involvement of the president. Until the president does that, this is going to be an exposed weakness, an exposed flank in our political structure.
And Director Clapper, the question is, you know, what General Hayden said before, we know you did it, stop it. I'm paraphrasing what he said. The question is, why won't the president do that?
Well, that's, of course, the key question. And one point I'd like to make is distinguishing between collusion, which is, you know, that's pretty significant. Whether there was or not, I really don't know. And as Mike said, we may never know exactly the evidence of that. To me, from the outset, from the first time I briefed, along with others, then President-elect Trump on January 6th, was his refusal to, for whatever reason, to acknowledge what the Russians have done, did do during our election, and will continue to do. And to me, that is the bigger issue. That is a profound threat to the very system, political system in this country. And I completely agree with Mike. You know, what he should be doing is being pretty stiff with his good friend Putin about not messing with us. But to me, that is the bigger issue here, is the president's mysterious indifference to the threat that Russia poses.
Yeah. North Korea also mistaken missile crisis or missile alerts. What's going on? I'm going to talk to these two gentlemen when we come back about that. North Korean state media ripping into President Trump, calling him a lunatic. Back with me now, General Michael Hayden and James Clapper. Director Clapper, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson attending a summit trying to deal with North Korea's provocations. Here's what he said the end game is right here.
The object of negotiations, if and when we get there, is the complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization of North Korea.
Does that seem possible?
Well, not to start with. I mean, I certainly subscribe to that as a long-term objective with North Korea, but to establish that as a condition for negotiations or that illicit commitment from the North Koreans that they agree to walk on the path of denuclearization, from my experience in dealing with North Koreans, that is a non-starter.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that realistic?
I vote with Jim. He was the J2 in Korea. I've had 2 tours in Korea. Let me be very candid. Given the current security situation in Northeast Asia, the North Koreans would be irrational to agree to give up their nuclear weapons. We call them an irrational, erratic regime, but this is coldly calculating. They've seen what's happened to Iraq, what's happened to Libya, to a lesser extent what happened to the Ukraine after they've given up weapons or didn't achieve weapons. So Jim's right. This may be an ultimate goal as the byproduct of a new security structure, but as a going-in position, it's a non-starter.
Can I ask you, Russia and China potentially probably the 2 biggest important parties in dealing with North Korea. They chose not to attend this summit. Is the U.S. involvement, do they need their involvement to make a deal?
Yes, particularly the Chinese. The Russians are a bit of a peripheral player here when it comes to the North Koreans. The Chinese are very important. It's a sadness that they weren't in Vancouver for the meeting. Frankly, I'm glad that we were in Vancouver for the meeting because given some of our positions, some of the things the president said, I mean, I can envision circumstances where we wouldn't have shown up either.
Interesting. Director Clapper, North and South Korea, they seem to be making some degree of progress. They've been holding talks about sending athletes to the upcoming Olympics. Japanese foreign minister says that we should not be fooled by the North's charm offensive. Does he have a point?
Well, he does, and what's going on now, I think, is transactional, and this is typical North Korean. And by the way, just to emphasize, underline a point Mike made, the North Koreans are rational in their context. They're very rational, and they know what they're doing. And so the North Koreans wanted to participate in the Winter Olympics, And so they reached out, and of course South Korea, who has the most at stake here, since they're closest to North Korea and the North Korean threat, was receptive. And so this is a good thing. And we've had this interludes of this dialogue before. It probably won't be sustained, but every time they do it, it's a good thing.
Yeah. This weekend, General Hayden, it was Hawaii who dealt with that false alarm about a possible missile strike. Today, Japan dealt with a similar scare about incoming North Korean, a missile from North Korea. Everyone is wondering, because this sort of made us think, what would happen if this was real? Yeah. How prepared are we here in the United States to deal with an erratic North Korean, a possible missile strike?
Yeah, so not erratic. Coldly calculating, but then again, if they have this capacity, you always have this danger that for one reason or another they might use it. Frankly, Don, I think the most telling part of the sequence of events on Oahu this past weekend is not the false alarm. I get that. That was bad. But no one knew what to do. Once they got the alarm, what's the plan? What happens next? And based upon all the local accounts, everyone was pretty much on their own, saying goodbye to their loved ones.
How much is it? How much do the folks in Washington have to? The administration? Does no one know what to do?
Well, it's a state responsibility. So the president's right. You know, the state needs to get its act together, and they will. I mean, these are responsible people. They'll do the right thing. A mistake was made. They'll correct it. But you know, the president consciously, and this is not all bad, but the president consciously has created a state of heightened tensions in which Saturday's kind of event can take place and have the effects that it had.
Yeah, and that's my question, a similar question to you, Director Clapper. North Korea blasted President Trump's boast of having a bigger nuclear button than them, calling his tweet the spasm of a lunatic. I mean, President Trump is, you know, not the original author of the North Korea standoff. Are you worried about this rhetoric that's been escalating, that making the problem worse?
Well, yes, I am, and I have spoken about this before, that I just think it'd be better to temper or moderate the rhetoric. I mean, typically, in the past, we haven't dignified, you know, the wild rhetoric that comes out of North Korea. Some of it's almost amusing. We haven't dignified it. Certainly, presidents have it in the past and just ignored it. So this rhetorical heat, you know, the bellicose schoolyard exchanges, kind of heightens the angst, and that's clearly was evident in the false alarm in Hawaii. You know, it conjured up recollections, and Mike may recall this as well. You know, the duck and cover exercises we used to do in grade school during the Cold War. And we haven't done that or even thought about it since the end of the Cold War. And I believe that this heated up rhetoric contributes to this atmosphere of anxiety. And again, to emphasize the point Mike made, what it showed was no one had any idea what to do. Now, I guess the one upside was the communication system worked.
Yeah. Well, that's glass half full, right? That's optimism there. Thank you, Director Clapper. Thank you, General Hayden. I appreciate it. When we come back,